What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Backpick Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Thomas. Today's guest is a very special one to me personally, a former teammate of mine, Michael Bugary. He was a highly touted high school baseball prospect, played at Cal, went on to get drafted and play in the Boston Red Sox organization. At a young age, Michael dealt with some identity crisis that led him down some wrong paths. He's now fully recovered and a motivational speaker, and I think his story speaks volumes for what kids are dealing with nowadays with social media and all the pressure that they're feeling. I think it's really important. I think you guys are really going to get a lot out of this one. Hope you enjoy it. The Backpick Podcast is brought to you by All Star Sporting Goods, who we think makes the best catcher's gear in the game. If you need a 10% discount, reach out on any of our social media platforms or send us an email at info@catchingacademy.com and we'll hook it up. So this is pretty special to me. Having somebody like you on the show, obviously very close to, former teammate of mine, seeing everything you're doing now, and really giving back after kind of what you've dealt with, going through just, some identity issues, obviously dealing with some health issues, a lot of things that have happened in your life. And I think, your story is so relevant to today's youth athlete. I think they're all really struggling with, who they are and what their identity is. And I think social media plays into a lot of that. But talk about kind of from day one, being a high school athlete. I literally was like, pulled up your bio from college today, and I'm looking, and senior year, you hit 15 freaking home runs in high school, and pitcher of the year, you're the man. And from the outside, I think everybody would have been like, "Oh, dude, that guy's the man. He's got it figured out." But talk to us about, at that age, what was really going on.
Yeah, junior year actually, but yeah, no, yeah. Sorry, got to correct you there. No, typical me, right? No, I think my journey with baseball it was failed from the start because it was built on this superficial foundation of proving something. I originally started at a different high school, at North County High School, and I that was when I loved baseball as a sport. And then I had a really good year on JV, and then my coach at that school, um, and, and I started seeking, different academies, and begging my parents to play elsewhere. And this was my first experience in politics of baseball, where especially in coaching, and I did taught lessons and coached for a long time too. There's baseball is so unique in that sense, is that there's some universal things, but there's also so many niches of batting stances and things you can teach. So it creates this like environment where you can have different perspectives and philosophies. And I think sometimes with our egos in baseball, that gets in the way. And this coach didn't like that I was out there playing from different teams, and I didn't get along with some of the upperclassmen. And he basically told me that I was going to be a JV player again that next year, after I dominated the JV team my freshman year. And I went out of that meeting just like heartbroken for the first time in my life, because I worked so hard to get to varsity. I worked so hard, and it was the first time an adult had basically just told me that I wasn't good enough. And so, I went to my parents, and I begged them, to help me transfer to go to Monterey High, and on a better baseball team. And that's when baseball transformed into, from my love for the game to my identity, to my higher power. Basically, it became an addiction, because now I had something to prove. So I went and I worked out and I trained and I got better and practiced every single day. And I went out there, and then the next year we won the championship at Monterey High. I made varsity my sophomore year. Then I broke all those records, um, the home run record, pitching record, whatnot. And then I started to get that attention and validation I wanted, right? And I started to get the letters from colleges and be invited to all these elite travel ball teams. But that junior year, when I hit those 15 home runs, I was sober. I was so focused on proving myself, and hitting that home run, that record time home run off that old team was I finally did it. And I was like, but then that sense of calm came over me, where my mission was accomplished. And now I started getting all these distractions, drinking alcohol and partying and doing all these other things, now because now I made it, until that pattern repeats itself again in college. But that's it was when I transferred high schools, I finally got to be this person that I thought I wanted to be, right? This baseball player that it was this loud, cocky, arrogant. I didn't care about. I just cared about any attention, like it didn't matter what kind of attention it was. I just wanted you to know me, you to know who I was. If you saw me, you knew me. And so yeah, that evolved from a metamorphosis almost, where it goes from a love for a game into the identity.
It's crazy because, I think that, if you think about your, timing of when this happened, you graduated in 2006, the high
Five,
school,
five.
2005. So, you graduated 2005. I mean, social media, not even a thing, right?
Yeah,
And you're thinking, and you're seeing like how you were even addicted to the validation of what were accomplishing and needed everybody to see it. Now these kids these days, they're growing up with like, they want it like right now. It's not even like, oh, I want to work, XXX, and then this spring I'm going to get everybody to. It's like they want to go to a tournament tomorrow, hit a
yeah,
home run, bat flip it, and post it on Twitter, and
yeah.
get the instant validation of how many likes and everything like that. Talk about just kind of now the metamorphosis of what the internet and social media has done to
Yeah,
maybe
it's funny
even
that
increase
yeah,
that.
yeah, absolutely. Sorry to interrupt you a little bit, but yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Because I think what it's done is it's watered it down, right? It's watered it down because when I had to do that, it had to be word of mouth, right? I had to have people hear about me. People had to know me, tell stories about me. It had to be like almost like a mythical. So when people finally saw you, like, oh, he's not that good. But that's how it was for like a lot of people, or he's really that good. Like the amount of effort it takes. And I overemphasize that off the field too, with drinking and partying and things, because I wanted to build this whole character out, in and outside the field. Now yeah, I can post these videos and all, so everybody's just the same, or it's just do these backflips for attention. It's not built on like that hard work foundation where you really had to go out there and do it and do it and do it. Now they can just pin that one moment. And I think too, I mean, looking back on it now, it would help my speaking career if I had some more videos of myself playing, you know what I mean? So we don't have, jealousy, but yeah, I think, when I played for like, and you just the travel ball teams and the NorCal teams and all these elite teams, like you it had to be the best players. Like you had to be the players that were heard about and talked about. It had to be the ones that put up all these crazy numbers. Now it's almost like and I taught lessons for years, so I was a big part of this. It's just like a cash grab where anybody can play, and
Mhm.
and because this is what I did when I played. I used to play for like 10 teams where I would just fly into the team. I'd play a tournament. I pitch the first game, bat third, and I leave just because I pitched that first game. I did it like had like 6 or 7 teams where I would do that too. And the people that were there on the team regularly that practiced and paid, it was kind of unfair to them, right? But that's how it was. And it was all organic. There was nothing. There's none of these snapshots. Everybody's trying to make a snapshot moment, right? That moment where they hit that home run. It was more all encompassing, where I had to create this character. And I think that creating those snapshot moments, it's the same but in a different way. It's just trying to get that validation, and that attention externally,
I love the way you say creating a character. Dive into that because again, you doing that in like we're talking about the early 2000s, and nowadays where guys can do that overnight, right? I mean, like you can
yeah,
create a character online that I mean, I think we even see it as adults where it's like you jump on Facebook and it looks like everybody's life's great, and then all of a sudden you hear, oh, so and so and so and so got divorced, and you're like, wait, what? Like I thought they were
yeah,
just like living it up in Maui on the internet, and so
yeah.
talk a little bit about what you mean when you say you're creating that character.
Yeah, so yeah, it's basically your identity, right? And you're so right, and that's what's so crazy about it is, yeah, you can put all that stuff online on the outside and make it seem like just putting your highest moments, but you don't really see like the real person. And yeah, so when I was at before my transfer to high schools, I was kind of chubby and a little dorky. I like certain things. I'm still dorky now, but by the time. Uh, I just wasn't popular. I didn't understand why the other kids didn't think that I was as cool as I thought I was. You know what I mean? And I got rejected by the girls that I liked. The older teammates didn't like me, and I just had that. I had this internal belief. That's why my book's called "The Disease of Me," because that's what it is. It's a disease that I have, where I just had this insatiable need for that attention and that validation, And when I was able to transfer schools, that was a time in that youth where I could be this person that I wanted to be. And mostly that person was because I saw my pro coaches, they were cocky and loud, being
Mhm.
how much energy you got to have, and cocky and loud, the way people treated them, the respect that they got. And I just knew that's who I wanted to be. That's the person I wanted to be. But it's like the reverse imposter syndrome, right? Because I became this person that deserved all the credit, but I didn't do anything yet. You know what I mean? Versus whereas you do a bunch of stuff and then you don't give yourself credit for it. It was the opposite. I created this character that wasn't naturally me. It wasn't organic, but I felt like I had to be that, and I could be, and I didn't realize all it did was make me look like an idiot, but I could be that belligerent, loud person, and that's why alcohol became such an effective tool for me, because I could be that off the field. It didn't help me. It didn't help me on the field when you can't really hit a 90-mile-an-hour fastball when you're drunk. It doesn't work out too well. Maybe a golf ball because it's not moving, right? But not a baseball. And that's where later on, and we can get into it, where Adderall really took its toll on me with playing. But yeah, no, I created that identity to where of this person that I thought you would think was cool, this person that I thought that I wanted to be, and it was really my way to keep everybody at arm's distance so I wouldn't get rejected again. And I think it's just like this need for attention, and it would never be enough. And especially like I said, when I got to getting all these letters from the colleges and all this attention for breaking all these records, it just was never enough, and my character just grew and grew more, and I needed more and more and more, and it would never have been enough for me if I had stayed healthy and I made whatever, played in the major leagues, made the all-star. It would just never have been enough until it eventually blew up in another way. And I see that now with the patterns in my life. But that identity was a way for me to protect myself, really, from not showing you the real me, because I was afraid it was never good enough.
So talk about how that kind of went into college. Obviously, you dealt with a lot of injuries as you got
Yeah,
into college, which kind of stunted the immediate growth. But talk again. Now you go into a whole new atmosphere. You walked into a team your first year that was loaded with talent.
yeah, all
Maybe
seniors
not a
pretty
great.
much. Yeah,
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 I mean a really good talented team. A lot of guys got drafted. A lot of big leaguers on that team.
yeah.
But just talk about now you come into that situation and how this character kind of developed and molded to that.
Yeah, it was hard for me at first, and I think that it wasn't even the physical prowess on the field anymore. I mean, I played in area codes. I was like at the best in area codes. I've been playing with all these good players for so long that it wasn't their physical talent that really got to me. It was more of the maturity level of being an adult, right? So my last year in high school, I just, after having that amazing junior year, I just got all the attention. I knew I was going to Berkeley when my the beginning of my senior season, and I started to get away with stuff. I started to, like, nobody ever questioned my behavior anymore, because I had, on the outside, I had, a scholarship to one of the best schools in the country and this and that. And so I would get away with things, and I would learn to manipulate adults, and I would drink, and I didn't stop caring about school, and I would just hang out with the wrong people. And by the time I got to college, I didn't have that, like I was telling you earlier, I didn't have that prove me wrong anymore that I really needed. And so when I got there, I was overwhelmed in the sense of the distractions, and the stakes were higher, and the responsibility of being a student athlete at a big university. And I think there's jokes being made. I remember where I would probably, like, the first 20 days I was there, I was drunk every day, going to all the frat parties, because I was so consumed by trying to prove my new worth to all these new people, and I had to make sure that they knew this character that I was off the field too, because I wanted them to think that I was this cool guy that got all the chicks and had fun, and I was loud, and I just had this skewed idea of what a masculine baseball player was in my brain, and I wanted to make sure that I showed that, and it was almost a compulsion for me to do that. And so then, yeah, naturally those distractions ended up for me getting injured, and I ended up getting right as I started getting some playing time my freshman year, I ended up hurting my knee and having to get surgery at the end of the year.
It's interesting because I remember as your teammate
Yeah,
always seeing, like when it was just you and me, I always saw flashes of like kind of who you really were.
yeah,
It seemed like you and I could connect a little bit differently. We always had, we're big same teams, sports fans, and that was
Yeah.
kind of our connection. And
Yeah.
but I looking back on it, I didn't have the maturity or the wherewithal to even see that you were going through this or figuring your identity out, right? I mean, because I was just
Yeah.
the same age, I was just a kid too. But
Sure.
it's funny when we talk about this now. I'm like, man, like I saw, who you were a lot. I saw the compassion. I saw I mean, how smart you are, which I think like, is one of those things that, you almost didn't even want people to know that you were like
Yeah.
an IQ guy. You know what I mean? And it's interesting now, like being able to have the perspective. And now that you have the perspective you have, and like I'm giving you on what I saw, what's your advice to that, budding superstar, high school player, and kind of how to handle okay, I've committed now in that situation like you struggled with, and then also man, like once you get on campus, what do we got to do when we get there?
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, I can't say, hey, don't drink and party. I mean, right? Because I was the one that did it all the time, and I think, but what I can say is that alcohol, in that sense, ruined every meaningful relationship in my life, and seeking that, and ruined my friendships, and caused me a lot of reputations. But what I can say, and especially, I think it's a unique perspective for me now, living out in Ohio. You're seeing the seasons and how young players, and they have to handle themselves in different seasons, and a lot of these players out here are three sport players, and I think especially being from California, we have that bias where we need to play baseball year round, and we need to do all that thing to compete at that next level. But I don't think that's much. And when I went back to school, and I appreciate you saying that stuff, by the way, those compliments. And I think at that time, I was never knew who I was. I had that, and that's where it's I have that internal conflict of the person I am, and the person that I was desperate to be. Right, that those two conflicting things, and I think that person it hindered me from being that other person that I was, and that's why I don't believe like I was a narcissist. I think that was more just selfish in that sense, because I had that empathy and stuff. But anyway, sorry, I digress. But yeah, I think when going to back to what I was saying is when went back to school, and I studied, I was in my why phase. Why did I end up the way that I am? Why did I go through all these things? And I took some psychology classes. And then I finally ended up doing uh, a thesis on a research report on athletic identity. Like why do certain athletes like myself, crash and burn after, or why do some, like, go through it? And one of the patterns that I saw, uh, with all the players that I played with, guys like Brandon Crawford, or other guys that I played around that all had these long, successful careers, is all those guys had relationships outside of baseball. They had relationships. It's like if I go into a room right now and I speak to a group of athletes and I say, "Hey, raise your hand. How many of you people have relationships? How many people and you have relationships that are outside of your sport? Like people that are in your inner circle that are outside of your sport?" And if you really think about it, there wasn't many for me, right? Because once you lose that, you lose everyone. You lose all your support system. That's what happened with me with the Red Sox. So I think one of the things is, how do you develop a multifaceted sense of self? How do you commit to yourself to being great at something? Yes, you should be, but how do you not have other hobbies and things that you like to do, or things that are outside of your sport that you can take a break on? Because it's scientifically proven, and there's research behind it, that you even perform better when you have more relationships and more experiences outside of just your sport. And I think that's the challenge, whether that be school, or see, I was just so focused on baseball and the guys around me, and this and being this baseball player, that I just shut off to everything else, and that became my whole identity in who I was. And I think seeking things outside of your sport is the best thing that I can give, because there's so many opportunities to be a well-rounded human being.
I think that goes to also, just a talking point on that is, a cautionary tale to parents too, of, a lot of times parents get too invested in the sport, and their relationship with their kid is too revolving around the sport. And so, and this is not pertaining to you, this is just a thought, but it's like, the end of the day, like those kids need to just go home and just be kids, and dad just be dad, and not be hitting coach, or, hey, we
Yeah.
got to do this, or hey, we got to do that. Because just like you said, like without something outside the game, Now you're taking your most important and cherished relationships and you're bringing them into the game. And so now you don't have that outlet or that freedom to just go be somebody else. Because a lot of times we just need to go home and be somebody else. My wife, she gives me shit sometimes because she'll be like, "How come you never tell me what's going on at work?" And I'm like, "Because I don't want to bring work to you. Like we
Yeah.
have a different life. We do
Yeah.
things that are happy and that we have in common interests. Like you don't give a shit about baseball, and that's great. Like I don't want you to. Like you don't need to know it. You don't need to care. Like we have our life, and then I have work. And I think that with parents is a very, very dangerous thing, because I think I've seen, teammates that I've had that we've had that, you see their relationships with their families have deteriorated because it's just been so strictly focused
Yeah.
on baseball.
Yeah, and I can comment on that big time because my parents were like that too. My parents, they didn't have, my dad is command sergeant major, the coolest guy in the world, man. He can do everything. He can he's out here now with me now on my property, but we got a skid steer and excavator. He can fix anything. We're out here doing all kinds of cool stuff. And by the time, the one thing he couldn't teach me was baseball, right? The one thing he couldn't teach me because he never played. And it's the sad part of my story is that he was the role model that I should have followed, and that I should have, but I chose to do my other coaches and things. And you're absolutely right. I think you were too, the first generation of that travel ball stuff, where it was almost compelled upon my parents to put me into as much baseball as possible, to as much travel teams, to as much showcases, and it was almost being told to them by these coaches, who don't necessarily have the best interest at heart. See, I idolized my coaches, who and my private coaches, who taught me lessons, and they became what I thought was part of my family. And when I got to a point where when I really hit that bottom and I couldn't throw anymore, I saw who they were, and when I realized that those people weren't role models, and they're actually just human, and actually just pretty crappy humans. It changed my
Mm-hmm.
perspective on a lot of things. And yeah, you're right. The parents, you know what I wish my parents did? You know what I wish they did? And this is the biggest advice that I can give to any parent. No matter how talented your kid is, make him get a summer job. Make him do a part-time summer job and have him learn the hard something that he's not gonna like, something that is not gonna be fun. I wish my parents drugged me and made me do that, and
Yeah.
made me part-time, whatever it was, flipping burgers. It doesn't matter what, something at the bottom made me and humbled me and made me do that. That would have been the most helpful thing to me by far. And not throwing 180 pitches a week, you know what I mean, all year round. And making me do a summer job where I would be kicking and screaming, and said, "Hey, if you don't, then you don't get any of this other stuff." Right. And that was the humility that I really needed, because I think especially, the percentages are so small of 2% of 1% of all athletes play D1, right? And then 1% of those play professionally, and then of those 1%, barely any of them have a career longer than 3 to 5 years, right? It's You almost have to create that sense of denial in your brain, right? That you're going to be the one that makes it, and when at each level, because you get the cream that rises, and you get more of that, like, ego, and that I'm better than you, and I'm greater than you than this. That there's no sense of humility to bring you down. And I wasn't prepared for that. My arm injury. I wasn't prepared for life, my finances, or any. I wasn't prepared for any of that because I didn't do any of that. I just had this cakewalk into me, and I think it's getting worse now because I was really good. I went to, I mean, when I was in high school and stuff, I went to every tournament. I crushed it everywhere. Some of these kids that are getting this kind of treatment aren't very good. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? They're getting this treatment, and they're getting put in. Then they get to college, and it's like, because I got to college where it got to a point where I uh had a few couple years that I was hurt and went through a red shirt and all this stuff. And then I got myself healthy and retrained again, proving myself again. And I became one of the best relief pitchers in the country for a while. I was that talented to be able to make those changes. But a lot of these people don't have the ability to make those changes. And I think that I just think there needs to be a dose of reality, and it's hard, especially at a young age, for introspection and youth to coexist, right? But I think it needs to come from the parents, because the parents have so much more power than they really think they do, you know.
And I think that's a great perspective for us as instructors and coaches too, where it's like, we have to have the right mindset, right? And I think that a lot of times I get the parents and, oh, he's doing this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, well, like we have to be realistic about their talent, right? And I can't just make everybody a big leaguer, right? But I can
Yeah.
try to get them to feel more comfortable and a little more confident and make them elevate their play, right? But if those parents don't have the perspective that the reason they're coming here is to legitimately put everything they have behind something, because the reality is, like, when you don't play baseball anymore, you've got to find something that you're
Yeah.
going to put everything behind and you're going to work and you're going to create, right? And I had, like a couple years ago, one of the kids I coached in Canada is the first kid I've ever coached that made it to the big leagues. And so they're playing in San Francisco and I go see him and I get home and my wife goes, what was that like? You get to see, your student play in the big leagues. And I said, you know what? I'm going to be honest with you. Like, it didn't feel any different than when I saw my student graduate and get a master's. And it didn't feel any
Yeah.
different than when the one graduated from the fire academy and became a firefighter. It didn't, it just didn't any different than when, somebody walked in here in a shirt and a tie and told me that they, are really successful in finance. Like, it doesn't change. Right. And I think that's the problem, is the perspective, and that even as coaches, our identity becomes, something more than, what they do validates me. Like, it doesn't, right?
Yeah.
Like, who they are is far
Exactly.
more important to me than what they accomplish.
You want to, I mean, it's about creating good people. You know what I mean? People that can take those skills of baseball, all the determination, the dealing with failure, the overcoming the obstacles, and how can you take those skills and put them into a different domain of your life, right? And different, because that's how they translate. See, and that's what I read about a lot in my book is it's about what I've gained and not what I've lost. Right? It's all the things that these things have given me, and baseball gave me so much. And I knew, I always thought baseball was like my predetermined destiny and who I was meant to be, and I was getting it from all these outside sources. But it wasn't, because I was always trying to be somebody different, right? It was never just being me. And I think that's the biggest thing I can say too, is that we always look for motivation. What can motivate us to do these different things, and how can I find? For me, it was always, I say it's two things. It's somebody telling me that I'm not good enough, or a pretty girl. um those are my two sources of motivation. I either have to have, like, hire somebody to walk around and tell me you suck at your taxes, you suck at this, or I just need to get a girlfriend. You know what I mean? But but I think what it really is discipline, right? The discipline that's the discipline bleeds motivation every time. How do I create these little wins every day? How do I create a routine? How do I, get up at a certain time? How do I do all these other little aspects of my life that give me that self-worth from inside? Right? Because then when I have that self-worth that comes from inside, then I can be myself at the risk of your approval. And once I do that, then I can start to see the things around me and see people for who they are, and surround myself with good people. And I think that was my biggest mistake, was who I surrounded myself with. I think like you said, it shouldn't. Hey, you got the big leagues. You're proud of him, but I think a lot of times these coaches, eh, what's their motives? Who are they doing it for? I think they're doing it for themselves, because that player in the major leagues is going to make their reputation better, or add to their portfolio or whatever. But
Put it on their
that's how.
website.
Yeah, and that's why I
Yeah.
got out of it. Honestly, that's why I got out of it, because I was always the guy that wanted to play, not be coached, not coached. But I got out of it because because there is that, just a small chance, and then you got parents that think that their kid's going to make it, and I didn't care about that. I care about good people, like this. Life is going to get so much harder than it is now, and it's just enjoy the game. And the one thing that I can say is to parents or anything, is just get them to college. Like, college, and that's what it should be about, because college was the best experience of my life. I meet people like you, my brothers, my friends, people that I'm gonna, for the rest of my life, I'm gonna love, that people that really actually know me, and that whole experience is, if that's what baseball can give you, then that's worth it in itself, and that's what it's all about. And don't get me wrong. I don't want to say, hey, don't dream to be a big leaguer, or a professional. I think that's absolutely what you should do. But I think as parents, we have to be realistic in a sense too, and not listen to all those voices, because these voices of all these coaches and these people around you are mostly just trying to get your money, to be honest. and so they're going to tell you what you want to hear, and tell you need to do this and you need to do that. I think we need to create good people, and that's what it's really missing.
Yeah, and life skills. Be process oriented. Understand that like if your kid wants to be a big leaguer and he takes all the right steps to try to do that by working hard, well, if he comes up short, like that's okay. And I think it's funny. I was talking to one of our former teammates, Josh Satin, played in the big leagues. And he's
Yeah,
talking about this is like when he had retired and he started getting into real estate and working and stuff. And he says, what's crazy? He goes, I spent my whole life trying to be the top 1%. I'm in the big leagues. I spent every ounce trying to do that. He goes, and then the minute I get into the real world, he goes, I really only have to be in like the top 20% and I'm making a good amount of money and I'm living a great life. And it's like, well,
yeah,
yeah, that's the point. If you
yeah,
try to go be 1% of something and you fail, but you're prepared to do a whole bunch of other shit.
yeah. That's awesome.
And
I
that's
love Josh.
that's the
I
cool
love
stuff.
Josh. Yeah,
I
yeah.
know he's the
No,
best.
yeah, he is cool. Yeah, I miss him. I haven't talked to him in a little while. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think too, when you do, I think the way that we look at failure too, right? I think, and I get asked all the time, like, do you get, because I speak now and I speak in front of a lot of people, and it's a little different than performing, because you're talking, and me, I'm not talking about, hey, how great I was at baseball. I'm airing out my dirty laundry most of the time. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about my most vulnerable stuff with addiction and all these other things, and I asked, what do you get nervous? And I don't. I get a little excited, which I guess is nerves, but you know, I don't care if I fail because I learned something, right? If the worst thing that's going to happen is I'm going to learn something, then what's the point of not doing it, or feeling nervous about it? And I think the way that we look at failure, and it's so funny, especially with baseball players, that's all we deal with, right? The whole game is based on failure, and
Mm-hmm.
we should be the best at it. And then it gets to life, and then there's no way to separate those domains, and that domain dependence where we think it's two different things, but it's the same skills, it's the same brain, it's the same mindset. You just have to look at it in a different way.
For sure. And we talked about a little bit of your struggles when you first got to college, but that went away. You had an incredible junior year, and you were you know the guy out of the pen for us in the biggest situations, and I think that was key, right? It wasn't this that like you were good and everybody could look at your numbers and say, oh, he had a great year. It was like, no, you were pitching in the biggest spots
Yeah,
that year. It ended up getting you a chance to play. Got drafted in the 15th round by the Red Sox and got a chance to play. Talk about now this kind of retransformation into being healthy, playing again, performing at a high level, and then that transition into pro ball.
yeah, yeah, I think I got to that point it was kind of reminiscent almost of high school in a sense where I played 3 years. I'd been there at 3 years at Cal, and I hadn't done much, and and I'll talk. That's too what's crazy about this transfer portal stuff too, and it would kind of drives me crazy. There's I had this sense of loyalty to Northern California, right? Like being at Cal, I'm on these Northern California teams. There's no other team that has California on their chest without something after it than where we're from. You know what I mean? That's who I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to play for. And now, I faced all this adversity my first 3 years. Now you see people transferring all the time now instead of overcoming it. Right. And I think that's one of my proudest moments of my life before all this stuff about how I overcame that. And then I started I had this moment to myself where I just knew, like, hey, I didn't come here for school. I didn't come here to do this. I didn't come here. I came here to play baseball. I haven't played. I've underperformed. I've had all this wasted potential. I haven't really done anything. And so I changed my mindset to start to discipline. I started to train my body, seeking outside things, doing everything I can to be healthy and to get back on the field. And chance had it where I was going to be our Sunday starter at the beginning of the year, and then I had that outing before the season. I got raked, at inter squad. I hadn't been raked. I was dealing the whole time as a starter, and I got raked. Gave up like 8 runs, and then coach started somebody else on Sunday. But then I came out of the bullpen and just pissed off, right? Just pissed off because that was my start, and I came out of the bullpen and shoved, and I just kept shoving and shoving in bullpen situations, and I just used that fuel that anger from being snubbed again, and then I became in all these then I just learned to love being a reliever. It fit me so well because all I was trying to do is strike everybody out anyway, because I just felt like, because in my mind my identity was like, I have to dominate you. I have to show you that I'm better than you. And what better way than that is to strike you out, which is incredibly selfish because, as a pitcher, you want to pitch to weak contact to get your teammate involved. You want to throw less pitches to keep your other players fresh. And that's just the way that I am. I'm selfish in the sense that I just want to strike everybody out. And that's why being in that role that satisfied me a lot. And yeah, that was, I think there was only 11 games which I didn't warm up or pitch in that year.
I believe it.
Yeah, it was the most important part of every game, and I love that. I love that fit my narrative. That fit the tension, and I was a little crazy sometimes, but I like that, and yeah, I mean, it was,
Got you
but
back
then
to the prove them wrong, right?
yeah. So then I got drafted out of nowhere, and that's the beauty. I think another beauty about playing at a big program is that they weren't there to see me in the inter squads and stuff like that. The scouts were there to see somebody else, and then they just saw me, how hard I worked, and then all of a sudden now I'm on their radar. And then when that happened, and then I get drafted, then I'm like, all right, there's that sense of, okay, that sense of worth. And I think one of those big, I write about this in my book in pretty detail, was that, I don't know if you remember that Arizona State game which I pitched, where I had gotten into some trouble. I got suspended for a few games, and then I had that pickoff thing in Stanford. I don't know if you remember that, but I ended up having to pick off like 11 times in a row or something. I got pissed and I had like the worst game of my life. And then it was Stanford. I mean, then it was Arizona State that next week, and they were top like 2 in the country at the time.
Yeah.
With Pat Murphy and them. And
Yep.
then that Friday night I got snubbed in the most important part of the game against this team. I got snubbed to go in in the 7th inning. They put somebody else in, and I was so pissed off, and I was on a bunch of Adderall. I was so just in a rage, and I went out there and I just absolutely lit them up, and I was just mouthing F you to all of them, and they thought I wanted to fight them, but it wasn't about them. It was about me, right? It was about this was I'd been here 4 years. I earned this. This was my spot, and how dare you not put me in? It was just such a selfish, crazy thing to think. And then that Sunday, I come in the 3rd inning, and we're down 3-0, and I end up almost pitching the whole game. And I remember this was I hadn't given up a hit. I'm just dominating all the way into the 8th inning, and I got a runner on second. I threw a couple balls, and then all of a sudden, the head coach comes out, and when the head coach comes out, it's a pitching change, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
what are you doing? I haven't given up a hit. You're gonna take me out of this game? I'm thinking to myself, what are you doing? And then he comes to me and goes, hey, Bugary, if I take you out of this game, we're gonna lose. And that whole game, I had been pitching with a chip on my shoulder. The whole game, I had been ignoring the pain in my shoulder. I had been ignoring the cramp in my hamstring. I had been ignoring all these things, and I was just so determined to prove myself again. And then when I heard that, it didn't have the motivation I think that he thought that it would help me in. It almost gave me an oversensing self of calm, because it was finally that moment where I was just that showed me like my worth from outside. You know what I mean? And then I gripped the ball a little. I started to question the pitch, for the first time. Question this for the first time that day, and I just felt a little bit relaxed, and I threw a change up, and first one I left up in the zone, and I gave up my first hit, scored the run, and so, but it was that the fact that that's what loosened me up was just hearing that just shows you how superficial it was, because that's all I wanted was just you to tell me that that what I did was worth something, and I think then once I got drafted, and I didn't get drafted as high as I thought I was going to be or should have been, and I kind of took that spark in with me a little bit. But at that point, I had an addiction to Adderall that I didn't know a lot about, and I think that really hindered me, because when you go to pro ball, games are at night, and I'm pitching in the later innings, and I'm taking amphetamines at nighttime, and I can't sleep. And so I found out, if I go out to the bars and drink, I can pass out eventually. And I think that really hurt me and my reputation early on. And then I had a pretty good rookie year actually, numbers wise. I pitched well, but I started to build that reputation. And when I came back the next year, I met with my doctors, got on a different prescription, and I was throwing better than I ever had been. I was, mid 90s, just dominating. My mindset was good. I was just got put in double A on spring training. I was just dealing. And that's when I threw a pitch later on, and I felt a pop in my elbow. And then I knew something was wrong, but you learn early on, as a rookie, that you don't want to complain about arm injuries, because they put you at the bottom of the depth chart. It takes a long time to get back up. You only want to complain literally when you can't throw. And so I learned that early on. And so I tried to throw through it a little bit, and it got to a point where I couldn't throw. And I ended up getting surgery that was ultimately unsuccessful. But I used to blame the Red Sox for a long time for that. That not taking so long to give me my surgery, or keeping me down there all year trying to throw and rehab because they didn't want to give it to me, and then for ruining my arm basically. When the reality was, when I got hurt and I was doing my rehab, I was so miserable because I couldn't get that validation on the field, that I was going out and drinking and abusing my medication when I should have been focusing on my arm. So it was ultimately my fault that ruined it. But then when I came back the next year, my arm just wasn't right. I was throwing like 84, and they just, even though I dealt, you know what I mean? Because I had really good stuff. I still dealt, but I'm throwing 84, and they said they didn't have the innings for me. So, but and yeah, and that's when I really was lost for the first time without it. I didn't have
So
that north. I didn't have that North Star. I didn't have that sense of purpose. I wasn't on a team. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a part of a team, and I didn't know what to do. And what I wanted to do, Brett, honestly, what I wanted to do was just to be alone and not think about it, because
mhm.
I had made it a point my whole life that everybody knew me for baseball. No matter where I went, you knew, how's baseball going? How's this going? Which is understandable. I rubbed it in your face. And the last thing that I wanted to do now was talk about baseball. And what works for that is painkillers, Oxycontin, and that's what I turned to at the time, because that helped me not think, and it helped me just be alone and feel okay when I didn't feel okay.
So that transition, obviously, to no more baseball led you down a tough path. Um, you got dealt another shitty hand in getting a brain tumor.
Oh yeah.
So talk a little bit about the next piece of, like, oh, you're already on a kind of downward spiral, and then you add this to the mix.
Yeah. After I got into that, I think, yeah, eventually I went to Oxycontin addiction. Then I eventually got into a point where it got to heroin, and got to really, I went to treatment, and then I got out of treatment, and I started to experience these debilitating headaches. And I'm really summarizing it. But then I was diagnosed with a medulloblastoma brain tumor, slightly smaller than a tennis ball, in my cerebellum, which is the voluntary movement part of your brain. That's why I still have issues with it when I speak now, because how I respond and cognitively talk, and I still have a bunch of side effects. But I had to get multiple brain surgeries, uh, intense chemotherapy, radiation. They had, like I always say this all the time, they had to build a special cage, that bolted my head down as the radiation blasted me. Lost all my hair, 60 plus pounds. Uh, yeah, I just had yellow tints around my skin. You couldn't, I was unrecognizable, and I wasn't. I just had such a big ego and pride. I wasn't one of those people to, like, announce my problems. I kind of hid, and I turned back into to opiates again. That was my solution. And because early on in my youth, and with baseball, I never found a solution internally. I always found solutions outside of myself. So, especially with alcohol and all these other things, I needed something for something. With Adderall, I needed something to help me, a solution outside of me, because me was never good enough. And so, um, alcohol was my solution for being social and partying and girls, and Adderall was my solution for focusing in baseball, and then opiates became my solution for for being alone and my pain, and I think, and one of the big things in my life now, how I live in the solution is managing my pain, right? And I have all these side effects that I deal with. So what happened was the chemotherapy and radiation that they gave me was so nasty that it completely wrecked my nervous system. So, uh, for years, I have this like buzzing all over my body. Then I have this intense peripheral neuropathy. It's called, at the end of your fingertips and your toes, and where I lost. I had hypersensitivity, where it's like pins and needles you're feeling, like really really intense, and at the same time numbness, where I had no feeling in the muscles of my shins. So like your jumping muscles, your anterior tibialis, where you think about, like when you walk, lift your ankle up till you walk and run. I had no feeling in that muscle, so I was just falling down. I just like went from like basically a pro athlete to decrepit overnight, and yeah, it was humbling, I mean, but again, in my recovery, I thought that, and this is an important thing to say, especially for your audience, especially for parents, is that there's culpability in my brain tumor, right? In my desperation to come back from my arm, I ran out of options. I ran out of I was willing to die at 40 to play 10 years in the major leagues. That was my mindset, right? And when my arm was broken and doctors told me that I could never throw right again, I didn't know how to hear that. What it did was it blurred lines in the sands that I thought that I would never cross. Right. I never thought that I would do steroids or human growth hormone. With the stigma around baseball, I never thought that I would do that. But in my desperation to fix my arm, I didn't have any other options. And so I went out and I bought human growth hormone and other anabolic steroids from a very shady source. And I misused it without any medical supervision, without any knowledge, without any, and that's what ultimately gave me my brain tumor. Right. So there's culpability. My actions and choices and these things, they caused these things. So it wasn't life that dealt me that hand. I dealt it to myself. And as sad as that is, I'm okay with that now, because it ended up being the biggest gift that I ever got. Right. But my point is that when I was at that moment of weakness where I didn't know what else to do, I didn't have people around me that told me, hey, this is probably not a good idea. You don't know what you're doing. There could be long-term effects. I didn't know that I had history in my family of brain tumors with children, because the type of tumor that I had was so rare in adults. It happens to less than 100 adults in the world a year. So rare. So I had no point of reference on how to fix my side effects. I had no point of reference on how to do anything. I was basically just I was on my own. But it happens mostly in children, and that's why we do all the work now at the children's hospital with my dog. But I'll get into that later. But yeah, it happens mostly in children, and so I had no person in my life that told me, hey, you should, this is probably not a good idea for you to do it. Instead, what I had was my coaches and people that helped me fund getting it. That told me that because it was in their best interest for me, because they didn't know how to help me. They didn't know what to say, but it was in their best interest for me to make it to the major league. So they were willing to be as desperate as I was. And those are the people that I surrounded myself with. And it hurt me, because I thought I loved them and I thought they were a part of my family, but I had to hide from my family that stuff, because my family would have said life's bigger than baseball. You don't need to do that stuff. You don't know what's going to do to you. And so those are the people that I chose to be around, and that's such an important message, because I needed somebody to say no, like, just, you need to think about. I needed somebody in my weakest moment. I'm 22 years old, my weakest moment. That there's life beyond it, uh, and that's when when I learned the people that I idolized, are just human too. And I don't think it was their intention to like hurt me or anything. I think that they got caught up in how good I was, and this whole event and thing, and I think they didn't know how to help me. But it's a sad story, and it was really hard for me to come to terms with that when I first realized that. Um, but I'm grateful for it now, though. So
Yeah, there's so many times that we have to have some common sense and understanding of a big picture of this stuff. And as much as I think, like you said, it, nobody wanted to hurt you. They wanted to help you, but their best way to help you was to say no. And I
yeah,
think too many times we want to, try to make the route easier hey, okay, I'll help you. Okay, I'll help. Okay, I'll help. And at some point, we got to say, no, look, we got to look at the big picture here. And you've obviously now, the perspective you have is incredible. Being able to look back on this, and I think one of the biggest keys, and I want to hear more about what you're doing now, and kind of what's really brought you to where you're at. But um, I think taking responsibility is something that takes a long time for people to really, take on, right? I mean, it's so easy to blame everybody else for everything that goes on in your life. I mean, I promise if you want to find somebody or something to blame, you can find it. It's so much easier. It's so much more healing, and it's such a more motivating process to just take responsibility for what goes on in your life. And if you can start to have that perspective, and you're not counting on anybody else ever, because you go up, I could have approached that situation differently, I could have done more. So tell me how you got to, like, what finally got to you the point of, like, that was my fault, I did that to myself, this was this, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's it's a tough question, right? I mean, I like to, when I preach now, I'm like, hey, yeah, it's your responsibility. Just clean up your side of the street. But I literally had to become physically, mentally, and spiritually broken before I got to that point, right? And I remember it's I got to there's a couple times where right after my treatment I was done, right after I was 2 weeks in remission, after my treatment, my mom finds me passed out in my car with drug paraphernalia on my lap, right? And me going and getting heroin 2 weeks after cancer is crazy, right? It's crazy for needing to find that solution. And after they left, and I remember lying on my couch, just broken, physically, just can't even recognize myself, and then an opiate withdrawal too, just writhing in pain all over, and that moment really planted a seed in me, and not to say that I wouldn't go back and relapse and do it again, but I got to this point my side effects of my treatment were so bad. Just a couple years after my treatment, after my hair started to grow back, after I started to gain some weight, I was just so miserable. At 27, 28 years old, I didn't know if I could have a family, be with a woman again. I didn't. My body wasn't functioning right. I didn't. Just this. I had this, just especially someone that of the character that I created with his masculinity and things, just having those things happen to me, it was uh just miserable. And I got into this point where I was in this limbo of agony that I call it, where it hurt too much to sit still, and it hurt too much to move. And I either had to end my life, I had to kill myself, or I had to do something different, and nothing I had done in the past worked, and nothing that within me, and I had a spiritual experience almost in a sense where, you know, at that point of bottom, just I had some willingness, the willingness to see myself in a different light, and to be honest, right? To be honest, because you are right with what you said. It's, for me, the truth is buried so deep under layers of blame and denial, right? Because blame and anger are so much easier than responsibility, right? It's so much easier. And the truth was that these things did happen to me. The things that did happen to me were my fault. Like, these products of the choices that I made, like my arm with the Red Sox, or with my brain cancer, or I had this moment where I just realized what an a-hole that I am. The way that I treat my family, the way that I just make everything about me. It's always about me. I'm selfish to my core, and even though I don't mean to be, I have this prism of uniqueness, of just this selfishness that I look at the world from, and I just had this overwhelming feeling of that I just need to see the world from outside of me. And once I started to be honest, and once I started to make those choices, and take that personal responsibility to look at my past in a different way, to look at, I like I said, I blame my coaches, and I blamed this, and I blamed that, but by doing that, I never looked at my behaviors. I never looked at my behaviors towards them, and how they may have affected their decisions, right? Because I always looked at it from what they did to me. But when I was able to see what I was doing to them as well too, Like, hey, maybe going out and partying every night after games, maybe they're going to treat you a little shitty. You know what I mean? Or maybe if I'm drinking 20 nights in a row in college, maybe I'm not going to be the guy that they play right away. Right. Or maybe if I'm doing all these other things, doesn't matter how. I just had this flood of things that were coming into me, like maybe you need to start taking a little bit of ownership for your life, because everything else, this blame is not working. It's got you completely broken and alone. And I was just tired of being the smartest guy in the room, because I was the only guy in the room, and I needed to move to a different room. So I started to listen and have some willingness to do other things. And what really got me into it was meditating, really learning how to sit in my pain and just to calm my mind. And once I learned that's when some things started to change for me.
Talk about just meditation in general, because I mean, this is a really difficult thing. I think, especially for our generation and younger, right? Because now we're all grew up with phones and all the distractions and things like that. I mean, meditating is I think probably at its most difficult point for people to actually accomplish. So talk about your process for how you do. I mean, did you do this on your own? Did you consult somebody? Did you do research? What got you into meditation, and how did you actually like push through this process? Because it's not easy.
No, it's funny because I when I was coming back from this, I would experience these bouts of rage. You know what I mean? I think I was so inner built up, and I remember one time I went up to my doctor at UCSF in San Francisco, and I was just infuriated. I was tired of taking MRIs. I was tired of doing all this stuff. I was tired of this pain I was in. I was tired, and I was just, you know, and I'm not a small guy, and so you got this little doctor, and I'm just pissed. I'm just like trying to get some answers because I have none. Like, I couldn't find anything on the internet about how to help me, right? Nothing. I couldn't find anything anywhere. I was just so frustrated, and so I kind of took it out on him. He's like, maybe you need to use the Calm app or something, and like, you just kind of, and I did. I started to use that app. You know what I mean? I just started to learn how to use it. I was like, maybe I'll just take a suggestion, because that was at that moment where I was in that phase where I'm willing to listen to other people for once. Maybe my ideas aren't the best, and I did that, and I did that for a little while, and it really helped me. And then I started to take those little 5-minute courses and those 10-minute courses, and I learned, just to get a feel for it. And I was also under the impression that I had this crazy mind that I could never just sit still, right? But that's not true. If you just practice, if I can do it, anybody can do it. It's just learning to sit into it slowly. And then what happened next was amazing, in a sense where once I got that willingness, I started to read more. I started to learn about my brain. I started to learn about the type of cancer that I had. I started, because I got into this point with personal responsibility. Because when you have personal responsibility, you start to take action, right? Because I needed to do something different, because my options were put a gun in my mouth or jump off a bridge or change, right? And I have my ego is way too big to take my own life, And I owe a lot of that to sports, And I appreciate it. Baseball. That's where baseball saved my life, in a sense, because it gave me that level of importance that I wouldn't do that, and which is another thing that I gained. But at the same time, so I started to read more, and I started to read stories about other people that going through really challenging times, and that's what hopefully my story and stuff does, is it shares with other people going through challenging times. But I learned a little bit about phantom limbs, which really inspired me, about how people who lose an arm or a leg, they still experience that nerve pain, where their limb used to be, and that kind of inspired me, where I just had all this nerve pain all over. I had this like sixth sense almost, to where I could feel every signal that was being sent from my brain. I could feel it. I could feel it. If I clenched my fist, I would get a massive headache. If I clenched my toes, I would get a massive headache, because it all started from because a medulloblastoma is a tumor of the central nervous system, the brain cancer of the central nervous system. So it was all my nerves that were messed up, and I was trying to figure out how to heal this. And so what I started to do was, after I learned how to do these 10-minute courses of meditation, then I could do it on my own, right? And what I would do was learn how to do body scans, to where I could focus on my problem areas of, like, my feet, and I could send that nerve signal to it, and as hard as I possibly could, without moving it, without flexing it, but sending that signal to flex it. And I did that for hundreds of hours. And sometimes it would be so painful to where I'd pass out, but I did it for hundreds of hours, and I slowly started to get started to get feeling back. And now I have about 75% back in feeling in my toes and in my hands. But I did that for hours, and it was the only solution that I had. And once I started to learn, then I combined that with exercise, and I started to, I think we take for granted like how our feet move and all these little things that we can do, but until you lose it, right? Until you lose it. So once I started learning how to grip my feet when I walk and grip my feet when I run, and then when I squat and when I lift, I combined all that, and then I started to get my strength back, and then slowly I started to get those feelings back, and I would jump rope with a leather jump rope, and just every time with my bare feet, and every time it hit I would pass out. It hurt so bad, but I learned to do those things and have that determination. Another thing baseball gave me. And so that's slowly how I learned to get my body back into shape. And then when my movements became more purposeful, so did my thinking, right? I started to think about things before I did them. Think about things I said before I said them. And I started to have that introspection. And for me, the only way that I get that, like you mentioned in the beginning, how do I get to that moment? Is pain. Pain is the only way I get to that. And unfortunately, it's like that for a lot of us. And I wish that I could shake these young kids and say, hey, look, you need to take responsibility. But a lot of us have to learn that the hard way. And why the other stuff is so important, why the getting the job is so important, why doing things outside of baseball is so important, because that's how you learn how to take responsibility beforehand. That's how you learn how to do things that you don't like to do. That's how you learn how to eat it from a boss that you don't respect. That's how you learn, swallow your pride and be humble, because that's what it takes to take personal responsibility. It takes humility. It takes humility, and it takes a willingness to look at yourself and say, you know what, you're not that great. You're not that special. And the only way that you do that with real life is to do those little things, outside of yourself. And it's hard to do that when you're 16 or 17 years old. That's why your parents got to do it. So
Yeah, and I mean, I think that again, it goes back to just piecing this together. Like, that nobody's asking that, hey, Michael Bugary, I'm a cautionary tale. Here's what you should do. This is how I did it. It's like, well, let's be proactive in little tiny pieces, right? Like, you
yeah,
don't have to, I tell kids all the time, I'm like, hey, we got to work at certain things. It's like, that doesn't mean like shut off your social life, or like, I'm
no,
only going to do this and that and the other thing. It's like, but consciously think about planning out your week. What does that look like? And then when you say, when you say to me, oh, I didn't have time for that, I'm like, well, like, uh, you probably did, right? If you really looked back at it and you said, well, I actually spent 20 minutes scrolling on my phone there that I probably could have, been more, thoughtful with and cared about. But even if it is to the point of like planning out time for you to look, if you want to scroll for a bit, all good. Let's
yeah.
plan it, right? Let's coordinate it to a point where we go, all right, I got this and this done. Now I afford myself 20 minutes to screw around on my phone, and then I'll get back to homework or doing whatever it is. But I think when you can consciously like put a time and an
Yeah.
understanding of when you're going to do stuff, makes such a difference. And it sounds like you just got to the point of like, this is what my day is going to look like because I don't have any other choice but to do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I got to,
I had to come to a point of complete failure. And I think what you're saying is absolutely right. And I, I can only see things from my experience. I can only see things from, I try to say, I'm like, if you're coming to me for self help, you got like bigger problems. You know what I mean? But I look at it when I'm thinking about myself as 16 or 17, when I'm talking to some of these kids and stuff. And I wouldn't have done that stuff on my own. I just wouldn't have. It's so much easier
totally.
to go on. Yeah, it's so much easier to take videos and do those. But that's where I think the role of the parent is so important, because the parents have the ability to force that upon them. Because hey, you want to be on your smartphone? Take your phone away.
Mm-hmm.
Limit your time, reward them, yeah, do the job, whatever it may be. And I think that they're instead of all those extra baseball camps and all those other things, maybe putting them in a little bit more, because I think of all those showcases and all those things that I went. It was different times where you had to do it word of mouth, in a sense where I couldn't send like a highlight video to coaches.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, yeah, we're, because in college was when you start to have those thoughts of when you see other high influence people around you, what they do, and how they get how they have success, and you start to want to do those things, right? And I think, yeah, no, I think you're right.
Well, I mean, I go back to the comment I made about watching one of my students play in the big leagues, and it's interesting because a couple months ago, you start putting out some great content of what you're doing and how you're giving back and telling your story, I was laying in bed and I literally was moved to tears. I'm in my bed. I'm crying, and I'm getting emotional right now just talking about it. But I've had tons of teammates play in the bigleagues, bro. Like I've had like guys that have
Yeah.
accomplished a ton in their life, right? But I've never felt a sense of pride and towards what you've accomplished and what you fought through. That it's like one of those things that it's like, man, like have a real perspective on life. Like nobody gives a shit if you make it to the big leagues. You know what I mean? Like I just have never felt more proud of somebody, one of my teammates, watching you overcome what you've overcome. And that's enough in itself. But for you to take it and use it as a tool to give back to others and help others is, remarkable. And I just can't tell you enough how proud I am. And I was so happy to have you on here and be able to help others on our podcast as well.
Thank you, bro. That means a lot to me.
So after that sappy emotional moment, last segment we always do on the show.
You're gonna make me cry, man. I'm a big tough man. I don't cry, man. I'm a big tough guy.
It's last segment on our show. I'm a foodie. I love food.
Okay,
And I think baseball and food kind of go together. So our last segment is called Baseball Bites. We're presented by Black Bear Diner, sponsors our little segment here. And we like to find out, you have to think of one place along your baseball journey, maybe from back home, maybe from where you are now. You got to think of one food place to add to our roadmap of places to eat throughout the country on the tour of baseball.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm kind of biased because now that I live in Ohio, I don't got In-N-Out Burger anymore. I don't got Nations. Remember Nations? I mean, that's a
Oh yeah.
I don't have that anymore. Oh my God, there's one. I got to pick one.
One.
Um, yeah, I think I'm gonna stick to the Bay Area, man. I'm just gonna go with Nations, man. You get a big burger. I don't know if it's still around, but
Oh, it's around.
yeah, it's around. Yeah, I mean, if
Not
you're in the
only
Bay
is there
Area,
not only the burgers, but I
oh,
mean those breakfasts. Like I remember like multiple times Sunday mornings, just going to
oh yeah,
Nations, getting those 3 Eggers and taking it
oh
back to the
yeah,
apartment and just watching football all day, just
oh
smashing
yeah,
breakfast
yeah.
from Nations. It was so good.
How good's that the picture with the pancakes with that butter on it? They
Oh
have it.
yes,
Yeah.
so
I mean,
good.
that's a
And it's like,
classic, right?
and a great college thing because it was like
Yeah,
$10 and they gave you this just like
yeah,
4 pancakes, like 3 eggs, like pounds of
yeah,
bacon on there. It was like unbelievable.
yeah,
But awesome, dude. Well, dude, I
yeah,
can't thank you enough for coming on. I mean, this is the stuff when we talk about wanting to, actually help people through this podcast. I mean, we can talk about nerd out about catching and technique all
yeah.
we want, but at the end of the day, this is the stuff that really makes a difference. And I truly appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Thank you. Yeah, I was having deeper conversations about stuff. I think that's my whole point of this. So
I
thank you,
love it.
Brett. Appreciate
We'll
it,
put
man.
a
Love you,
link
man.
out,
Thank
but
you.
I love you, buddy. We'll put a link out, but michaelbugary.com. The book is Disease of Me. Do you have an expected release date yet?
Probably most likely by the end of the year or the first month of the new year. I'm working with editors and publishers right now, but it's finished. I'm just
Perfect.
working on the other stuff of it. Yeah. So
Love it. I think it's going to be a must read for most. So thank you again, brother, and we'll talk soon.
thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another great episode. Be sure to hit like and subscribe on all platforms. And remember, to be great, it takes what it takes.